Welcome to No Alter Egos, the place for conversation without the mask. We're broadcast every Monday at 2 p.m. on WHPB 98.5 The Wire in Pine Hills, Florida, WUVS 103.7 The Beat in Muskegon, Michigan, and we have a Tuesday rebroadcast every 2 p.m. on WVBH LP Power 105.3 in Benton Harbor, Michigan. We're also going to be supplementing our live broadcast with a YouTube rebroadcast as well every Tuesday at 5 p.m. So just in case you missed the live broadcast or you tune in a little bit late, it's going to be available for you on demand, both on YouTube and as of right now on the Umoja Radio app. We're really happy to announce that that's going to be every Tuesday beginning at 5 p.m. You're going to be able to get the YouTube copy, and the Umoja Radio app copy will also be available during that time frame in the week. We're also working on an RSS feed so that coming soon, it's going to be available on all your favorite podcasting platforms as well. So whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, you name it, we're going to make sure that we can bring it and have an avenue for you. However you listen to or choose to listen to your podcast, you're going to have an avenue that you can take it with you wherever you go and have it with you on demand just in case you missed the live weekly broadcast. But as I said, those weekly broadcasts do come on every Monday at 2 p.m. and with the Tuesday rebroadcast on our Benton Harbor partner station. So to everyone that's just been listening in, welcome to the show. If you're tuning in on our YouTube channel, please don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're hearing this on the radio and you want to go tune into our YouTube, as I said, you can find us at No Alter Egos Podcast on YouTube. We can also be found on Facebook and on Instagram at No Alter Egos. That's the handle for both the Facebook and the Instagram channel. So if you go to facebook.com/No Alter Egos, you're going to find us. And if you go to instagram.com/No Alter Egos or just type in at No Alter Egos, you'll find us there as well. We'll be providing content from the show every single week. We'll be uploading different snippets, whether it's our Hard Truth Tuesdays, where we take a segment from the show that really contains a hard truth about life each week. We're going to post those every Tuesday. We're going to have our Final Thought Fridays. So in case you missed the final thought, it'll be available for a snippet. And more exclusive content from our YouTube channel is going to be available on our social media channels. Just wanted to give everyone a way to really connect with the show. Looking forward to continuing to make these video podcasts for you as well. And for everyone listening on the radio, as I said, if you just want to hear it again on demand, if there's something that you really liked, obviously you may not be able to hit rewind in the moment on the radio, but you can always find us on YouTube or on the Umoja Radio app for right now. And we will be coming very soon to all of your favorite podcasting platforms as well. So Apple, Spotify, Google, etc. Anyways, we have a really great show to get into this week, though. I'm your host, Trll Kennedy, and I just want to welcome everyone back in, from those who have been listening in from the very beginning, to those who joined maybe in the middle of last year, to those who are maybe brand new to the show. Thank you for listening in. Thank you for watching. This is No Alter Egos. This is the place for conversations without the mask. Really, I just try and bring you guys unfiltered news items from around the week that maybe aren't getting talked about enough, or just don't have, I'm not going to say necessarily the right spin, but maybe are brought with the corporate spin that comes with the mass news agenda. You don't get to hear some of the real realities and truths behind some of these stories. And so my goal and objective every week is to bring you a fresh perspective on really important news stories and get your minds going, along with a final thought to end the week. We're also going to have a couple new segments that get brought in this week. Really happy to announce that. I'm going to be sharing with you guys one of my favorite passions of life, which is reading. So whatever book I'm currently reading, I'm going to share you a short synopsis of where I am, where you can find the book, and what it's really about. This week, I'm going to be speaking to you about my continuation of the reading of The Civil War, A Narrative by Shelby Foote. Got around to just about finishing the book. There's a couple of chapters left in it, and just some really interesting stuff and perspective I'm going to share with you guys a little later on in the broadcast, especially as it pertains to President Lincoln and the cause of the Civil War in the wake of the Emancipation Proclamation. Also going to be sharing tech talk with you guys moving on from week to week. I'm going to be doing my best to bring you guys a fresh story every week from the world of technology to keep you guys updated and abreast of what's changing with those gadgets and devices that help keep us connected to each other and the rest of the world in general. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm sure it's either on your mobile phone or maybe on your laptop computer. And so there's actually a really cool story I wanted to bring you guys this week with one of the new internet browsers, but we'll get to that segment in a little bit. We have a lot to talk about this week, man. There was so much, and there has been so much that's happened this week. It's almost hard to even think about. But from Brittney Griner being arrested in Russia, and this was back in January, she's been detained there for over a month now. And the geopolitical and international ramifications of that arrest, especially in the wake of Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, and what's been going on inside of that country and in Eastern Europe generally. We're going to talk, of course, I don't know if you guys heard about this, but Black Panther director Ryan Coogler ended up getting arrested after trying to make a withdrawal from his account with Bank of America. It happened back in January, but the story just broke this past week. And it just goes to show, we keep pretending that if you just get a certain amount of money, that systemic racism can't affect you, or that systemic racism only occurs when a white person does something extremely racist to a black person. We tend to think of it that way, but systemic racism is more about a caste system that is so socially ingrained into every human being that it becomes part and parcel of the way that all of us live our everyday lives. Those prejudices, whether it's prejudices against your own people or prejudices against people that look different from you, they're drilled into us every single day of our lives. And this example of Ryan Coogler being arrested, even as a world famous director, for just trying to get his own money from his own bank account and to pay off. I mean, we'll get into the details of the story when I talk about it. But it's just another example of the crazy things that we kind of just have to deal with all the time. We're also going to be talking about the Cain Velasquez story coming out of California. It broke a couple of weeks ago, of course, but I wanted some more details to come out. And of course, Cain Velasquez is still incarcerated right now on attempted murder charges after shooting at a gentleman whom he was under the impression, and it is believed, to have molested his young relative, his 4-year-old relative, hundreds of times potentially at her daycare. Cain got wind of this, chased the guy down, and fired some shots while the guy was apparently trying to flee the scene with his parents, ended up wounding the guy's father. And I'll have some more details on that as we talk about it. But Cain is now sitting in jail without bail, while the man who is accused of having sexually assaulted this 4-year-old child is back on the streets, free for the time being, while he faces those sexual charges. It's a bit of a messed up system. We're going to get into some details of why that seems to be the case, in terms of why pedophiles seem to be able to get away with so much in society, why it's so hard for there to be real justice when sexual predators go after their victims. Why is it that they're allowed to be back on the outside when they're one of the most harmful sets of people in all of society, if we're just being honest about it? We're also going to get into the Calvin Ridley suspension, man. He's gone for a year now, a year-long suspension in the wake of not only betting accusations, but it was reported that he bet. Now, he claims it was $1,500, but there's actually a Sports Illustrated report that came out and detailed that it was actually closer to $4,000, right around $3,900 in total, that he ended up betting on 6 games back this past season during his time away from the Atlanta Falcons. We're going to get into some details about not only the nature of his suspension, but why the suspension was so heavy-handed and why it is that the NFL, even though it has betting partnerships, has chosen to go after this player with such a hefty suspension when other players that do things like commit acts of domestic violence and spousal abuse get barely a slap on the wrist, a few games away. Why it is that Calvin Ridley is going to end up having to probably appeal the suspension because of the hypocritical double standard, it seems, between the nature of the offense and the actual punishment that the NFL chooses to hand down. We're also going to talk about Jussie Smollet. He just got sentenced this past week. If you have been keeping up with that, he got sentenced to some jail time. Really, it was 30 months of probation that he got sentenced to, but the first 5 of which will have to be spent inside of the Cook County Jail. He got sentenced back in Chicago for the hate crime that he apparently staged back in 2019. That just seemed on its face initially to be a bit much. Them saying this is MAGA country and having the noose. You saying you were going out for Subway at 2 a.m. Just a lot of stuff that didn't add up. But of course, the jury did find him guilty of filing that false police report, of staging the crime and what have you. And so he recently, as of this past week, was finally sentenced. We're going to get into some of the details of that sentencing and what this means for his career moving forward. And of course, our main story and topic of the podcast today, which is the fact that Congress, after more than 120 years of efforts, has finally passed an anti-lynching bill. It's a bit shameful having, that 120 years behind them, having to even say and preface it with that. It's not even a bit, it's very shameful. But at the end of the day, it's better that something be done and that it's finally been done than for us to have continued to go on years without it. And so that'll be our main topic of the day, when these efforts first started, what the roadblocks have kind of been, and how we finally arrived at this inflection point in history. Especially for those who aren't aware, the woman that accused Emmett Till of whistling at her and essentially ending his life after that accusation. We then know what happened. He was hunted down, beaten, shot, thrown in the river. She's still alive, very much alive, living her best life, maybe her worst life. I don't know that she has a conscience. What I do know is that she's never had to face any kind of legal ramifications for those clearly false accusations that she made against this young black child. And she's been allowed to live out the length of her days in relative peace and quiet, short of whatever her guilty or maybe not guilty conscience, because maybe she's a sociopath. But whatever the case may be, she's still alive and very much free. And that's another thing that we'll be talking about in the wake of this bill being passed, is there's a renewed call from the family of Emmett Till for her to face some sort of justice for the false accusations that she ended up making that cost this poor young man his life in such a brutal and horrific fashion. One that ultimately helped to galvanize the civil rights movement, but one that shouldn't have had to happen in the first place and would not have happened without the lies of Carolyn Bryant. We're going to get into that. But before we get into the podcast itself, just want to give a shout out to our show sponsor, as usual, Born Saint Clothing and Merchandise. The world makes us sinners, but we are born saints. For more information on Born Saint, you can find them on Instagram at brn.saint, or you can also find them at www.Trll Kennedy, that's Trll with no I, so TRLLKENNEDY.com/shop. There's going to be some new items coming out. Of course, right now we have hoodies, sweatshirts, and shirts available, as well as a monogram pack-all or backpack, if you want to call it that. And there's going to be more new merchandise arriving just in time for spring 2022. Go ahead and give them a follow on Instagram. Check out the merchandise on the website. And as always, we thank them for being able to sponsor the show. I'm really excited to bring you guys this episode. We have to get off and kick into things. So without any further ado, let's jump into our first topic of the day. And that's going to be this Brittney Griner situation and what's happened with her over in Russia with her arrest. So the Brittney Griner situation is a very special, potentially uniquely dangerous one. Obviously, because of the situation on the international stage that's taking place right now, with Russia having invaded and currently being in the middle of bombing the Ukraine, trying to take it over and add it to the Russian state as one of its territories. It's already a poison pill, but it's complicated by several things. One, the fact that Brittney is a foreign-born person. She's a U.S. national. She plays basketball over in Russia during the WNBA offseason. And we're going to get into the reasons why she even has to do that momentarily. But the hard truth and reality of it is, not only because she's foreign-born, but because Brittney is a lesbian. She's gay. She's part of the LGBTQIA+ community. And if you don't know how strict and staunch Russia's anti-LGBTQ laws are, well, we're going to find out with this potential case. Now, what she's accused of having done is having brought over some hash oil. It looks like maybe one of those vape pens or whatever. They said they found, quote, a significant amount in her luggage as she was flying into Moscow from New York this past month. And so they detained her and have been detaining her without any consular access. She hasn't been able to contact the U.S. Embassy over in Russia during her detainment. But one of the crazier things about this is, as I said, because she is a member of that community, Russia may not be so inclined to treat her with the dignity and decency that any human being deserves. Vladimir Putin kind of leaned hard into some real conservative ideologies in order to secure and solidify, just a little bit more support, if you will, amongst his followers in the country. He's really leaned into some hard right culture war talking points as his political agenda, in addition to some of his other more insane moves on the international stage. And so Brittney has been detained. She's had contact with her lawyer and counsel over there, but as I said, she hasn't been able to contact the U.S. Embassy. And I think one of the bigger tragedies of all this is the fact that Brittney had to be over in Russia in the first place. Because, in my opinion, a part of the blame falls squarely on the shoulders of the WNBA. It is a league which, to this point, has woefully underpaid its players. And don't get me wrong, I understand the full-on economics of the situation, right? Which is that the salary caps and things like that are based on revenues, which can come from ad sharing and sponsorship and partnerships with different corporations and things like that. Of course, you need to have a large television viewership, a large attendance for the games in order to generate revenues to pay the players higher salaries. We can get into that all day. But if it's supposed to be a sister league to the NBA, why is there no form of profit sharing or revenue sharing in terms of allowing NBA teams and WNBA teams to have some kind of collective player salary pool, or maybe even a separate one from the additional NBA salary pool? Because NBA owners aren't short on cash. They're making a ton of money. And if they were willing to cut into their profit margins 2%, it's not going to break the bank for them. They set aside 2% of that money and say, you know what, we're going to set this aside as a WNBA player pool. I'm not going to say it's going to make the most ridiculous difference in the world, but at the very least, it would bump the salaries of some WNBA players up, especially WNBA superstars, to where they don't have to travel to other countries and end up in situations like this, where now Brittney Griner, because she was getting paid almost 5 times as much in the Russian league what she's making in the WNBA, she felt compelled, of course. She was making just over $220,000 a year, which is less than the NBA league minimum per year, to go and play basketball in the WNBA here at home. She was making over $1 million a year to go play in the offseason in Russia. And so if you're wondering, well, why was she there in the first place? It's because she was going to go play the game that she loved, and she was making significantly more money doing it, playing in a foreign country. Countries like China and Russia are actually paying their women athletes far better than the US is paying our women athletes. That's why the women's national soccer team, which is literally our crown jewel of athletics, they've won several World Cups. They are far better than the men's national team, and they are far more relevant than the US men's national team. And they have been paid a crumb of what US men's national team players are paid. They just had to arrive at a settlement with the US national team and with US soccer of around $22 to $24 million because they're not getting paid nearly what they deserve to be paid. You know, it's one of those shameful things, but it's what's been going on. And unfortunately, because women are so woefully underpaid, especially at the professional athletic level here in our country, you have a situation where Brittney Griner traveling to Russia to just go play this game that she loves, and yes, maybe carrying some hash oil, is now facing potentially 10 years in jail because of that situation. And as I said, the WNBA, they need to be held to account in this situation because they are not a progressive league, or not as progressive a league, because they have made some progressive changes. So let me not make that kind of a blanket statement, but they're not nearly as progressive as they claim to be, because they ended up finding the New York Liberty $500,000 for chartering flights for their players, claiming that the chartered flights would give their players a competitive advantage because they would be more well rested than their opponents. So instead of making a new standard for the league and making it something to where the other teams are going to have to keep up, they said, we're going to just punish you guys. This is the logic that they used. And so it's the largest fine that they've ever imposed on a team, but $500,000 they fined the New York Liberty because they wanted to make sure that their players could travel in relative comfort and style. And instead of saying, you know what, that seems like a good idea, they imposed the $500,000 fine on the franchise and are discouraging the behavior. And this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. This is the reason why players in the offseason are going to other countries and taking on these contracts, because they know and understand that compared to their NBA counterparts, it's just not worth it. It's not worth it. And so for Brittney Griner, I wish her the absolute best of luck. This situation is truly terrible and awful. If there are any new updates in the future that are newsworthy, I'll try and bring that to you guys as well. But for now, she is still unfortunately stuck in a Russian jail, and she is facing up to 10 years in jail for simply having some marijuana or hash oil on her while she was traveling into the country. You could talk with whatever you want about drugs and whatnot. I will never be someone that advocates or speaks the hypocritical nonsense I see a lot of people speak out against marijuana. At the end of the day, it is not only harmless, it is medicinal and has shown to have medicinal properties for many people to help with many different ailments. I'm not going to get into that right now, but suffice it to say, Brittney Griner shouldn't be facing any jail time for this, period. But we're going to keep things moving to our second story of the day in the interest of time. And that story is, of course, the arrest of Ryan Coogler as he attempted to withdraw money from his own bank account. I'm blown over this, you guys. So I'm sure a lot of you heard about this over the past week, but Ryan Coogler essentially goes to the Buckhead Bank of America. He walks in, he's wearing a face mask and some sunglasses because why not? The face mask, obviously, because of the times that we're living in, and the sunglasses because he's a world famous director. He walks in, he hands them a note as well as his ID and his debit card to his account. The note says, "Hi, I'm trying to withdraw $12,000 from my checking account. Can someone please use the money counter elsewhere? Here's my ID and debit card. I would like to be as discreet as possible." Now, all that had to have taken place is that whoever was behind the teller desk look at his ID, match the name to the card, ask him to maybe remove his face mask and glasses temporarily so she can verify, maybe let him know, I'll have to go have a manager do this. And then they take him to a back room somewhere, count his money out, give him his money, and he'll be on the way. And one thing, because I'm going to get into this story in a little more detail in a second, but something that I noticed is a lot of people that will never have access to $12,000 at one point or another in their lives inside of their bank accounts, commenting on what he should have done to go get his money. Oh, why didn't you call the bank ahead? For those kind of large withdrawals, you usually have to set up some kind of process. It just goes to show the widespread ignorance of some people when it comes to if you are an individual that has net worth. Of course, is that a measure that you can take? Sure. But I can assure you that if Ryan Coogler had walked in there and had not been a black man, he would have not had the cops called on him while presenting his ID as well as his debit card to withdraw money from his own bank account. That's this crazy thing. I see people speculating about what he should and shouldn't have done in this moment, the policies and protocols, as though they themselves have ever in their lives had to go into the bank to go take out that amount of money ever. It's laughable, but it is what it is. I know what the comments section is going to be like. It's usually filled with people that take in the least amount of information and are ready to, it's full of Dunning-Kruger effect types. People who are so ignorant that they don't know about their own ignorance, but they just love to spout things off. At any rate, let's get back into what proceeds to happen to my man, Ryan Coogler. He goes in, he hands the note to this teller. And this is back on January 7th of this past year, so fresh after New Year's. He hands the note to the teller. And as I said, the note says, please be discreet. I like to count it somewhere else. Maybe talk to the manager. Because obviously, if you're a high net worth individual, and maybe even a black high net worth individual, you don't want to attract attention to yourself. So as I previously mentioned, all these people coming out the woodworks in the comments section to talk about what he should and shouldn't have done are speaking from a place of genuine and complete ignorance. But as I said, that's what the comments section on a Facebook or an Instagram is usually going to look like. People that want to just voice their opinions because they have nothing better to do with their times and can't contribute anything of real value. So they go on the internet and relieve their brain of the pressure buildup from not being able to have themselves heard all day or year or whatever the case may be. But at any rate, common sense says, if I'm taking out a large amount of money, I don't want to make myself a target. I don't want to put myself in the crosshairs of somebody that's looking to come up on a lick. So what do? I go and I try and be as discreet as possible. In fact, for withdrawals of over $10,000, there's usually going to be an alert that's placed on your account. And that's what happened in this case. He goes, he hands her the note, and the teller, who is black, by the way, sees the alert pop up, goes and tells her manager of the alert, and says that he's trying to rob the bank. Nothing else. Hasn't run the check to verify who he is. Hasn't asked him to take down his mask so she can see and verify the ID as well as the name. Hasn't checked the full account balance yet to make sure. She just goes and tells her manager, this black dude's trying to rob the bank. And so they call the police on him. And so Ryan Coogler, who has done this many times in the past, as stated by him, he's standing there in all likelihood waiting to probably hear from a manager. And what happens instead? Police officers walk in. One begins to draw his gun. In fact, takes his gun out of the holster. And he's like, whoa, what's going on? Because at the end of the day, he doesn't realize that the cops have been called on him until they're in the bank arresting him for trying to withdraw money from his own account. And so one of the things that I want to touch on, especially with this, is the demon the scourge of systemic racism, as it were. Because it's always assumed that it's some white person doing it to some black person, or maybe some non-black person doing it to black people, or some white person doing it to some minority or person of color. And so it allows us to skirt around the real nuances of this poisonous psychological system that exists not just here in America, but around the world, right? Because we constantly don't want to call racism unless it's something really blatant. Like when that real estate broker was trying to show the homes over in Michigan last year, and a neighbor called the cops because he was showing it to a black father and son, and they called and said that they were breaking into the home, and so a realtor was held at gunpoint. And so we say, oh, that's blatant racism. Or like when the guy tried to go cash the check from the work settlement that he had, and the bank thought he was trying to commit fraud, and so they called the police. And now he's going to get a larger check from the bank because they called the police on him. See, that's what we like to see of as racism, and we're always looking for some white person doing it to some black person to say, huh, that's what it looks like. But it ignores the subtleties that this psychological system, the subtle effects that it has on people. Because the teller in this case was black, but so trained to see any black person that looks remotely, quote, suspicious, and in this case, Ryan Coogler had on his mask and sunglasses. Once again, I'm a world famous director. I'm not trying to make myself a random lick. Perchance someone recognizes me inside this bank and hears me say, yeah, let me get $12,000 from my account so I can walk outside and someone points a gun at my head and says, give me the cash you just took out of your account. So what does she do? She doesn't even do the proper checks. In my hope, there's still some more details that have to come out, but I hope she's fired. I hope she's fired, because this is such a disgracefully idiotic thing. And as I said, the one thing that they don't teach you about systemic racism is that as a black person, it helps you to internalize anti-blackness too. See, what we don't ever want to discuss is the PTSD that happens inside the hood. So when young black boys see other young black boys, they automatically think of them as ops or enemies if they don't know them personally, and immediately they think of themselves in danger. We have the music that reinforces this. We have media stories that are quicker to paint black criminality as not only more prevalent, but to paint black criminals in more inhuman terms, really humanizing their victims and making black criminals out to be far worse. You see, there's all these little things that play into it. And psychologically, that has an effect on black people as well. Because as a black man, there have been times when I've been around other black men, and I have to remind myself, like, none of these people are dangerous until they show themselves to be so. Because sometimes you get like a heightened, like, you know, and if I find myself in a certain environment where certain energies are present, like you see certain things going on or the way certain people are moving, then it's like, okay, I'll remove myself from this environment. But I'll have to admit, there's even times when in my head, I have to stop and be careful and look at myself and be like, yo, like, this person's not your enemy. They're not looking to harm you. Because as a black person, that's what this system of systemic racism does to you as well. It helps you to internalize anti-blackness within yourself. And so this young black bank teller, instead of just simply trying to do her job, calls the police on this world famous director for trying to take money out of his own account. And we have this shameful story and display of a man who should, by all accounts and ways and means, have just gotten his money and left the bank, having been arrested and embarrassed, pointed out for who he was in the most embarrassing and degrading way possible. And now having to have Bank of America apologize. And like I said, I hope that teller was fired. There's no apology that's going to make up for it. You put my life in danger by calling the police on me. That's just me. Maybe he forgave her. Maybe she's still working there. I don't care. What I do care about is the fact that the man that brought a generation of children, the Black Panther, that brought a generation of people Fruitvale Station along with Michael B. Jordan, he was almost put in a situation where his life could have been in danger because of the ignorance and perceived threat of just his black skin and him asking for a large amount of money. And that's insane. But once again, insanity is a part of the daily reality of living here in America. We don't like to admit it until it affects us personally. We don't care about the mass shootings until someone that you know or you are involved in one. But that's how it is. And to be honest with you, man, there are so many systems in place that I fear it may never, ever be truly, completely undone. That we'll just take baby step after baby step after baby step. And 500 years from now, there'll still be massive amounts of injustice. We're going to move on to our third story of the day, though, and that is this Cain Velasquez situation. Now, if you don't know what happened with Cain Velasquez, Joe Rogan's talked about it on his podcast. Cain Velasquez found out that this gentleman, Harry Galarte, had been molesting his 4-year-old relative for quite some time at her daycare. A 4-year-old child. And Cain did what I think any sane, decent person would do. I'm going to find this person and get rid of them. I have a principle, and I won't go into full details, but suffice it to say that there are several types of human beings on this planet, all criminal types, that I see no chance of rehabilitation for. And I feel as though if they were just off the planet tomorrow, the world would immediately become a better place. Among them are pedophiles, serial killers, rapists, and domestic abusers. Now, I don't know if they should die immediately or just be put in jail for life sentences, but that's just my philosophy. You don't have to agree with it. That's just how I feel. I feel that you can be forgiven for a lot of things and that people commit crimes and make mistakes, even killers. Notice how I didn't say murderers. I said serial killers, because people have taken other people's lives in fits of rage. Anything can happen. I have several people in my family that have lost their lives, unfortunately, in that tragic manner, and they're still cold cases. I've had to learn how to forgive. But what I do know is that there are some types of people who, no matter the jail time, no matter what you do, their mind is broken beyond repair. There's nothing good that they'll contribute to the human species. All they can do is bring pain into the world. And so this dude, Harry Galarte, is believed to have been sexually molesting this 4-year-old child. Cain Velasquez finds out and flies into a fit of rage, as once again, any reasonable person would do. Like, I have a niece and nephew. If anything would happen to them, God help the person that does it to them. You can bring this video up years later at the trial if you want. But the truth of the matter is, I don't believe that those people will ever change that harm children like that, right? And so he flies into a fit of rage, as any reasonable person would do, and goes off after this guy who happened to be driving with his step-parents at the time. Now, where he made, I believe, maybe his first mistake, but once again, in the heat of the moment, you never know, he fires off into this truck, ends up striking the guy's stepfather who was with him at the time, right? Now, the guy's stepfather is going to live, but Cain Velasquez has been arrested, charged with attempted murder, and has been denied bail because the judge thinks he'll be a threat to the community for this act of violence. So what happened to the guy that molested this young child? You may think he's in jail too, but he's not. He's posted bail and he's now back free on the streets awaiting trial on the sexual charges. And this is the kind of backwards logic that I think about in our justice system, because there are many unfair parts to the justice system of a truth. Like, we know this. There are so many unfair aspects to the justice system here in America. But to think that when someone catches a pedophile after that, and that person has likely been doing it for years and gets their hands on them, and to think that they face stiffer punishment than the actual predator themselves, that's just beyond me, man. It's beyond me. Cain Velasquez should not be in jail right now. He should at least be allowed access to bail. And you know what? It's another day in our backwards justice system. I just got to shake my head at it. Because to think that, once again, this gentleman that was out here preying on children is free and roaming the streets, and someone that was attempting to right obviously a horrible wrong in society is behind bars, you know, it boggles my mind. But hashtag free Cain Velasquez. He shouldn't be locked up. He should have the ability to post bail. We're going to move on to our next story of the day, though. Have you guys heard about Calvin Ridley's suspension? Maybe you've been living under a rock if you haven't. Now, Calvin Ridley, he's the wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons, probably their best receiver. And Calvin was away from the team for about 6 or 7 games this past season. Some injuries as well as mental health stuff. He just needed to take a break from the game. And it was discovered because the NFL, in their partnership with several betting companies, it was reported that he bet upwards of $3,900 on a series of 6 games. This is in addition to some other bets he made on other sports, but as it pertains strictly to the reason why he was punished by the NFL, he initially came out and said it was $1,500, but it wasn't. Some deeper digging and reporting indicated that it was $3,900 in total that he ended up betting on these games. And I got to be honest with you, he got a year-long suspension, 17 games. He's going to miss out on his entire salary for the year. And I could see if you were trying to send a message like a strong anti-gambling stance, but several things. One, the NFL, they have partnerships between DraftKings, FanDuel, as well as several other betting houses where they allow the fans to bet on the games. They're making revenue off of the gambling. They have a team in Las Vegas. They're going to be hosting a Super Bowl in Las Vegas. The NFL does not inherently have an issue with gambling. It's a vice that they encourage because it's another revenue stream for their organization. But two, and the thing that I think about the most, is what on earth is the NFL standard for egregious behavior and conduct unbecoming of a player or detrimental to the league? Because they're claiming that's the reason why they came down so heavy-handedly on Calvin Ridley, is they want to discourage the players from engaging in this kind of behavior moving forward. But I say, okay, you want to discourage the behavior, try and claim that all you want, fine, whatever. But, and there is a but that comes along with this. Why on earth would you suspend him for a year when players that get domestic violence charges brought against them, heck, we think back to when Ray Rice and that horrific video of him knocking his fiancée out in the elevator came to the light in the public. What did he get, 6 games? 6 games for that. Domestic abusers routinely get less than a season. And a guy that bet less than what I'm sure is 1/10 of a game check, because Calvin Ridley is making millions of dollars per year. For less than 1/10 of a game check, you're going to tell me that you suspended this guy for an entire season? I call BS on it. And this is one of the reasons why people, like, the NFL already has a lot on their plate to deal with between the John Gruden lawsuit that is probably and hopefully going to bring even more of their egregious and more than likely racist backdoor conversations to the light. There's already that. There's the Brian Flores lawsuit that I'm sure and hopefully will expose some of the practices when it comes to the hiring of black and minority coaches by all of the teams. That always goes unsaid, but somehow anytime there's coaching vacancies, black coaches are never good enough. Minority coaches are never good enough, right? They already have all these things on their plate and the reputation in the past of being more comfortable with allowing domestic abusers to play their game. And now you want to come down heavy-handed on Calvin Ridley for placing bets on his team to win when he was away from them. I get it. It was wrong. He knows it was wrong, but this should have been 4 games maximum at worst. And this is why, I mean, Roger Goodell, like, what are you doing? Seriously. You're one of the most powerful men in sports in the world. And it's been misstep after misstep throughout his career. I'm surprised they aren't called. If it wasn't for Rob Manfred and his woeful mismanagement of baseball, Roger Goodell would be the most disliked commissioner in all of professional sports. But Rob Manfred has been doing such an awful job, which shout out to baseball for finally getting their act together and getting a new CBA signed. But Rob Manfred has been an awful commissioner for baseball. And if it wasn't for him, then the world would be looking at Roger Goodell as the worst commissioner in pro sports. From the way they handled the Colin Kaepernick kneeling situation, blackballing him from the league, willfully shifting and misleading the narrative of why he was kneeling, and then claiming, well, now we have a problem on our hands because the fans are going to be his. A problem that they created, right? And all under Goodell's leadership and guidance and management. At the end of the day, man, Calvin Ridley, I hope he appeals it, and I hope he gets it reduced to the 4 games that it deserves to be. And to the NFL, shame on you for this ridiculous double standard that you continue to uphold year after year after year, in allowing these violent players who beat their spouses at home to get second chance after second chance in your league, but then hypocritically coming down in heavy-handed manners on people that commit relatively minor infractions by comparison. I don't even want to talk about this anymore. We all know who the NFL has been, who they are, at least as an organization. It pisses me off that I love football so much. It's a game that I really love. But this is unfortunately the product that we have to deal with, in the ownership of that product and the leadership in terms of the league and the organization that we have to live with. It is what it is. Until something better comes up, until there's a more inclusive league and players start to migrate over there, we're going to have to deal with this nonsense for the foreseeable future. It's been 100 years and counting. I don't see them being incentivized to change now outside of their pockets being hit. So let's move on to our next topic, and that is Jussie Smollet. My goodness, man. I've never seen someone so willfully and willingly fumble a gigantic bag for nothing in my life. I remember when the story first broke, I heard it and I was like, oh my God, that sounds terrible. Now, some of the details were a little bit like, whoa, that's really blatant. Like the whole, they said this is MAGA country, the noose around the neck, the time of the attack, the fact that you were going to Subway at 1, 2 in the morning. Like there were certain aspects of the story that certainly was like, bro, like, okay, seriously. At the same time, you never want to immediately dismiss what someone has gone through or what they're saying, right? And so as he detailed this horrific ordeal and what he had to go through, in my head, like everybody else, I'm like, yo, this is terrible. And then like a month later, some things started to fall apart. And then 2 months later, you hear that the attackers may have been his personal trainers. And then little by little, the story starts to fall apart to the point where now 2 going on 3 years later, he's been sentenced to 150 days in jail and 2 years of probation afterwards. So it's really a 30-month probation sentence, but the first 5 months of which are to be served in jail. 150 days, plus I think a $120,000 fine and another either $10,000 or $25,000 fine. Just fines out the wazoo. And was it worth it? That's probably been the question that's on my mind the most. From the time that they said he was going to have to go to trial, to the end of the trial and him being found guilty, to the sentencing this past week, that's been the question. Why? And was it worth it? To throw your career, your reputation, and your dignity all away, now to throw your freedom away, for him to try and claim, oh, they're sentencing me to jail because I'm black. That may be, but you brought it on yourself, Jussie. You brought it on yourself, man. And then to have him have the outburst in court, this is not true, I'm not guilty, and I'm not suicidal, as they brought him away, because they're going to be keeping him in protective custody during the 150-day stint in jail. But I keep asking myself, and thank God his antics haven't affected his sister Journey's career. She's an incredible actress. But now your brother is going to be known and forever known as this pariah, because not only for the LGBTQ community, but for the black community, it was a double-edged sword of falsehoods. It was the ultimate boy who cried wolf, because moving forward, I even saw it in some of the comments section with the Ryan Coogler situation. Like, oh, I'll wait for all the facts to come out before this is a Jussie Smollet 2.0. And granted, I know that it's not right, because all this is people who are secretly and inherently racist just looking for more things to add to their confirmation bias so they can justify the horrible feelings that they hold in the pits of their soul. I know this and recognize it, but it still adds ammunition to those guns. It still adds fuel to those fires. And my question is, why? It's so not necessary. But Jussie, bruh, you're in jail now. What can I say? You can't say much. Cannot say much for you, man. Other than, I don't think it was worth it. And here you are. Now you're going to be in jail in protective custody. People making memes about your prison stint. And all because what? You wanted some more attention. You thought that because we were at the height of the Trump presidency, you could really try and smear the president and his supporters. Like, you did so much more damage than the potential good you could have brought about had this been a real situation, that it's senseless. It really is senseless. And now you're paying the price for it. Anyways, we're going to move on to our main story of the day before I get into our final few segments, which is the passage of this anti-lynching legislation that the Congress has finally passed after 120 years of attempts. George Henry White of North Carolina from the House of Representatives was the first U.S. congressperson to introduce the bill, or an attempt to criminalize lynching. This was in the year 1900. It was shot down. In fact, attempts to pass anti-lynching have really been part of the effort to switch the racial component and makeup of each party. Because up until the New Deal era and President Roosevelt, Democrats in the South especially were staunchly opposed to passing any kind of anti-lynching legislation. Republicans had taken up the cause, and in fact, with President Lincoln being a Republican president, them being a fairly new party, at least in their modern form, because the Republican Party as a term, or as it were, existed since the days of Thomas Jefferson, but they were really formalized as a party in the 1850s. And with President Lincoln being the great emancipator, as he was known to be, passing that law, it was, it was a bit of a challenge to the old guard, if you will. And so Republicans were able to bring in African Americans in droves towards their causes. Of course, with the advent of the Ku Klux Klan and extreme racial terror inside of the United States in the 1870s, it became less and less popular, although they still tried to maintain the fight. And once again, it wasn't until 1900 when that representative came and introduced the bill again as Congress's only black lawmaker at the time that we saw efforts pick back up. But since then, time after time after time, efforts have failed. Up until as recently as 2018, and even in 2020, the House of Representatives passed a vote 422-3, with 3 Republicans choosing to vote no on the bill, but a Senate minority blocked the passage of the bill. And so finally, after 120 years of attempts to get anti-lynching legislation passed, Bobby Rush, the representative from Illinois who will be retiring as of the end of this coming Congress or this current congressional session, they finally managed to get anti-lynching laws passed. Mind you, the penalty for lynching is now up to 30 years in prison. And I would think it goes without saying that's hopefully in addition to the murder charges that will come onto it. So it'll be concurrent instead of, or I should say it'll be consecutive sentences instead of concurrent sentences. At any rate, it was all brought on by, of course we know, and it was named after the death of Emmett Till. It was named after Emmett Till, who died almost 70 years ago now, was murdered because a young woman in Alabama, or Mississippi, I should say, a young woman in Mississippi claimed that he whistled at her as he was exiting a corner store while he was visiting some family from the Chicago area. He was originally from Chicago and was down visiting family in Mississippi. This white woman claimed that he whistled at her as she was exiting the store, and her relatives went, found him at his home, dragged him out, beat him to death, shot him up, threw his body in the river. When it was found, it's hard to describe the state of the corpse, but this young 14-year-old boy was massacred over a lie that Miss Bryant admitted to decades later. And once again, she's free as a bird. She's an elderly woman now and has lived her life free as a bird since wrongfully accusing this young man of something as innocuous, even if he had whistled at her. But it was a lie. We now, of course, know it was a lie. At any rate, the bill was named after him. And it is shameful to me, and I join Emmett Till's family and relatives in calling for renewed charges against this woman. She cost someone their life in a horrific manner, and she didn't have to. And I don't think that Carolyn Bryant isn't. I'm sure she's still a staunch racist to this day. I don't trust her character as a person, and she needs to face justice for what she had done to that poor young boy. I, for one, can't stand the fact that it took this long, or that Emmett Till had to die for the world to see what was really going on in the US while they proclaimed to be this beacon of freedom to the rest of the world. To be a black American was to live in a constant state of fear of, could I be killed by mob violence today? Could someone lie on me and a lynch mob shows up to my doorstep? Between 1862 and 1968, there were 4,732, a little under 4,800 people lynched officially. That's an official number. I'm sure there were more than that were lynched in this country in that relatively, I guess, 100-year time period, you could call it. And of that, 70% of them were black or African American. It's really quite shameful that that is where we are and that's what we have in our history. But it is what it is. We need to acknowledge that history. And to think that it took Congress 120 years to just pass anti-lynching legislation, much less they still have not corrected the error in the 13th Amendment, because it's not an error. It's a profit center for the government and for private industry now. But slavery, as I said last week, is still legal. Anyways, I'm glad that the bill has been passed. It is a shame that it's taken this long, though. And Carolyn Bryant needs to be in prison, jail. You need to haul her old out. Almost cussed. You need to haul her old butt off to jail. Seriously. We're going to keep things pushing, though, as we're coming short on time. I want to talk about what I've been reading this week. I've been continuing my journey into the Civil War narrative by Shelby Foote, and it's been intriguing to see President Lincoln. I'm coming up near the end of the book, chapters 35 through 38. It talks about President Lincoln being convinced to eventually make the Emancipation Proclamation a thing by first a Quaker woman who he called a friend who came to visit him, and she told him, God sent me here to let you know that you are his prophet in this time. You have to be the one that puts an end to this scourge of slavery. And he was hesitant to that message. He said, if God sent you, why didn't he also let me? If he gave you the message, why didn't he also give me the message? Why are you coming to tell me this personally? He was very hesitant to receive it into his spirit. And then within a month, a delegation of ministers from Chicago stopped by with the same sentiments again, saying, look, Abe, you're the guy. You're who God has chosen to put an end to this horrible practice. And he let them know, well, that may be the case, but I'm still not fully convinced of it all. Although I say this, and he went on to provide a caveat. He said that even though I've said that, it's not to say that I'm completely opposed to it or that I have any hesitance or can't acknowledge the fact that it's an evil institution. It's just that right now, his main goals and interests were to preserve the Union. And so one of the ministers stayed behind after the conversation, getting some hope from the president in those words, saying, look, Mr. President, I know the burden that you're dealing with. And this is me paraphrasing, but he said, at the end of the day, we firmly believe that you are the one that God has chosen in this moment to really end this practice for us. The president said, well, if that's the case, then why did he send some people from the city of Chicago? Even back then, Chicago had a real gangster reputation, apparently. But I am happy those people visited him because at the end of the day, he did make the Emancipation Proclamation. And with that proclamation, it immediately ended any chance that Europe would get involved, because Europe was looking to get involved, especially France, because they wanted cotton. They were going to get involved possibly on the side of the South. And with the declaration that essentially slavery was the cause of the South and anti-slavery was the cause of the North, he made it impossible for the European nations to get involved, because for any European nation to get involved would be to tacitly endorse slavery. They knew this in Britain and they knew this in France as well. And so I'm glad, and shout out to the Quakers for always being abolitionists and being staunchly anti-slavery, for really doing something incredible to help push our country forward. So that's what I've been reading. You can find it on Amazon's Audible app, as well as on the Amazon app if you want to go shopping for the actual narrative. But it's about 6,000 pages between 3 volumes. That's why I got the audiobook. It's made it much more of a joy to read. Sometimes it gets tedious having to sit down and read through all those pages, but with my audiobook, I can listen, I can rewind if I missed something. It's been wonderful to listen to it. And there's been so much more context and wonderful information provided about the history of one of the more, if not the most defining moment in our nation's history. We're going to move on to our second to last topic of the day before our final thought, and that is our Tech Talk Minute. Now, if you haven't used the Brave browser, I would highly recommend that you download it. It's what I currently use for a majority of my web browsing. One, because they pay you to surf the internet. So you can earn BAT, which is basic attention token, for allowing them to place ads. You get paid for the ads that show up on your feed, and you can just click the ads away. They come at the top of the browser usually, and they don't bother me at all. And while it's not much, you can earn a couple dollars a month just from surfing the internet. And that's pretty cool if you ask me. But in addition to that, they've been actively working now to get rid of this thing called bounce tracking. So if you don't know what bounce tracking is, essentially, you have these privacy settings in place that you have on your browser, usually to prevent cookies and things like that from tracking your web activity from site to site. And so when you set the permissions in place, back in about 2014, new protocols started being created to allow third-party trackers into the main URL, so that when you decline cookies from a particular site, there's a quick redirect that takes place that happens almost imperceptibly to you, but it redirects to another third party, injects the cookies from that other website as a first-party cookie, and puts you back into the website, all without you even noticing that it's happened. It takes place behind the scenes. And so by re-injecting these cookies that aren't directly linked to the website that you're trying to visit, they're able to track your activity from site to site and keep tabs on your habits that way, making your privacy defenses essentially obsolete. And what has happened is the Brave browser company, once again, which I love, they have created what they're calling unlinkable bouncing. So essentially, they make sure that those new scripts cannot be written into the actual website whenever you're surfing. So whenever they detect that these third-party scripts are attempting to write themselves into the site, redirect you and bring you back, it cuts it off completely and prevents these third-party trackers from circumventing your actual privacy settings and privacy defenses. It's really cool. The Brave browser is free right now. It's available on Apple as well as on Android, I believe. And it has been a fantastic web surfing experience for me. You can link your Apple passwords to it so that you don't have to worry about losing them. And most importantly, as I said, They're really working hard to update and upgrade your privacy whenever you're surfing the web. So check out Brave browser as well as their unlinkable bouncing, which is another step they're taking to make the web surfing experience not only more profitable for you, but more private as well. We're going to move on to our final thought of the day as we're running short on time. And that thought is this: learn your value and then demand it unflinchingly. So often we get caught up in trying to please other people that we forget to realize and recognize the own things within ourselves that we bring to the table. For the longest time, I suffered from this, where there were years of work that I put into learning certain skills and services that I was giving people access to for free under the guise of friendship. So when people would come to you and say, oh, I need a favor or this or that, for me, because maybe, I'm not going to say it was relatively easy to learn, but because I learned it, it was like, well, yeah, you're a friend, I'm going to do this favor. Not realizing people are taking advantage of your kind nature. But the instant that it clicked in my mind that no, like, you've worked hard to earn and learn your skills. There's value that you bring to the table, and don't let anyone ever try to circumvent that value with whatever term they try, whether they're saying they're providing you with opportunity or if they're trying to use friendship or whatever the case may be. Know your worth. Learn your worth. It is what you say it is, and you can be honest with yourself and base it off of the time that you've put in to learning certain things. But once you discover and find your self-worth, hold on to it for dear life, because it's what you have. It's all you have in this world is the value that you know is in yourself. And when you know and hold that value within yourself, it becomes that much harder for people to try and take advantage of you, which people will try to do. But at the end of the day, you have to know in and of yourself what it is that you not only bring to the table, but how hard you've had to work to bring so much to the table. And don't let anyone cheat you out of a single cent or scintilla of it for any reason whatsoever. We don't do favors around here. You learn your worth, and then you demand it from the world unflinchingly. That is how you advance. That is how you upgrade. Thank you all so much for being here with me this week. Thank you for listening in. We've had hopefully a wonderful time together. I will see you guys next week. Go out there this week. Be the person that you're meant to be. Know your worth. Ask it, demand it. Don't settle for less than it. Take care of yourselves as always, and God bless.
Looking in the mirror, I know I'm imperfect, just like everybody else I know. Most times I wish the world looked beneath the surface, but I guess that's how life goes. Had to learn to love myself this time around. Pop a bottle and then take a sip just because. Book a flight and then take a trip just because. Love myself just because.